This video demonstrates the simple solution for task 1. Task 1 is the continuation from the previous lab, and in this for this lab, we will add in the database and how to write database connection to insert new records into database. So before I go through the sample solutions with you, first I will just do the demonstrations of to show how the system should perform. So this is previously in the previous lab we already have a form that allow us to enter 6 scores, and when the user click the submit button, the 6 scores will be sent to the back end to do the further processing. And in this lab, we will modify the source code to connect to the database. For the original add scores.php, we add in one data list called student. So this student data list will populate the student ID retrieved from the students table. So in this lab, you need to create a new database called Lab09. Inside the Lab9, there are 2 tables, scores and students. In the students table, we have 6 records here, which later I will show you how to insert these 6 records into the database. If you when I share the questions to you, I also share the task 1 SQL statements. So before you start writing the code, you need to create the database. The name is Lab9, and you also need to create a table students, scores, and also another table scores. Then we will insert some records for students. So this is the student ID that we have populate from the data. We have retrieved from the database to populate the data list to allow the users to select the user that they want to insert the record. So for example, now if we see in the score set, we already have 2 records here. We can choose one of the student ID to insert the records. Let's say I choose this record and I add in the scores for these students. When I click submit, it will bring me to the grader.php code. The grader.php will do the processing for us. So this is what we have done in the previous lab. Calculate the average scores and also print the grade. And now we'll add in the database part to connect to the database and insert the new record. So in this code, I also insert. We have print a message to inform the users that the new record created successfully, and I also print a message to show you that we managed to retrieve the last inserted ID. Because when we create the table, right, we already make the scores ID to be auto increment. So that's why the last record adding it will become the score ID will be 3. If now I refresh the table, you will see that the new record has been added to the database with the score ID 3, and we can use a method to call and retrieve the last inserted ID. So this is just to print out for us to validate whether we have retrieved the right ID or not. So now we in this program, when we come to grader.php, there are 2 links provided here. If the user click view scores, this view scores.php, we use the get method to pass the last inserted ID equals to 3 to view scores.php for further processing. So besides the so when we when we retrieve the ID equals to 3 for this particular record, the last inserted record, we will be able to retrieve all the scores and print it in this form. So this this is a form that allows us to we can modify the scores Like let's say, for example, I changed score 3 to 69 and changed it score 1 to 99. This allows us to modify it. So this is actually a form. But to create, normally when we have a form, this will be the empty. This will be, and will give an empty text input. But since we are asking user to update, so we need to retrieve the original content from this by using the primary key. We can retrieve the scores for this score ID. Then this when the user make any changes to it and click the update button, the database will update the record for this particular student. So if you see this is the original one. Now as after I click the update and when I refresh it, this is the latest score has changed to 99 and score 3 has changed to 69. So the changes already been updated. So later I will demonstrate to you how we write the codes for updates. So this in this edit scores.php, it consists of two parts of the code. So if now I go back to add new scores. So if let's say I add another new scores, I will demonstrate the delete part. And now we have when I click submit and go to view scores, you can see that in this view scores.php file, we actually have two buttons. You can choose to update or choose to delete. Just now I already shows you how we can modify the value in this text input to update the scores. We can also choose to delete. If I choose to delete, I will first prompt me a confirmation message. If I cancel, then it will not perform the delete function. If I click delete and click OK, this record will be deleted. So before I delete it, I just refresh it again to show you that this record has been created. And now if I click OK to delete this record, you shows that record deleted successfully, and this also done by the same file edit scores.php. So edit scores.php will have an if-else statement to handle update, another one to handle delete. So later I will show you in the source code how we can handle the two requests in the same file. And if I refresh this, then you can see that the last record has been removed from the database. So this is what you're supposed to do for task 1. Now I will explain the sample solutions. So before I explain the sample solutions, I will show you just in case if you are still not sure how to set up the database, I will drop this database in order to show you how to create the database again. So if you look at phpMyAdmin, actually there are a few different tabs that allow you to do different things. One of the things, if you click operations, when you come to operation, right, they have some of the, they also provide some functions for you to perform the function without writing the SQL statement. So let's say if you want to change this database name, you want to change it to Lab09, and you type the new name here and click go. You will rename it to Lab9A. So same things, you can also click operations, and if you want to drop the table, you remove the database, you can come here and click remove database, and this will help us to drop the whole database. Okay, so you can see Lab9 has been removed. Now we will create a new database. So we want to create a new database called Lab9. So you type your database name here and click create. So the new database has been created. You can refer back to the to create the table. I already give you the query. So for example, for the students table, we need to have student ID and also the student name. And this will be the primary student ID will be primary key. For scores, scores table, we have score ID, student ID, and also the 6 scores. We also store the average score and the grade. Student ID will be the foreign key. So this is the table of the SQL statement to create scores. After we create the tables, you can insert these six records into students, the student ID and also the name. So this is the insert SQL statement to insert into students with these 6 records. So now you can copy the SQL to quickly create the table and also insert some values. You can copy the SQL statement here. So later you will see that we will be able to insert this. Now we already have Lab9. You can copy and paste the SQL statement. When you want to execute the query, press Ctrl Enter. Okay, so now if you click Lab9 to refresh it, scores tables has been created, which is empty at the moment, and we have for students table, we have inserted 6 records. So you can see here, just now we have the insert statement to insert these 6 records with the student ID and name values. So we already now we have done with the database. So another things that you have to remember is we also need to in the config file besides the database name, we also need to set up the user that we give them access to this database. So for this database, we need to create a user called user1 with the password user1 ABC. But during the lecture, we already have we already created a user called user1. So if you go back to the database server and click user accounts, you can see that actually I already have a username called user1. You can click to edit the privilege to add in when you click edit, you click database. Okay, this one I already give the access to it. So if you haven't give any access, okay, so I will remove this. Okay, I have a Lab9. Now I will I will choose Lab9 to give access. So when you come to user accounts, if you already have previously, if you already have this the same user with accounts has been created, but don't have the access to this database yet, you can click edit privileges and you click database. You will be able to check whether this user has the database specific privileges or not. So far we only have access to test and Lab9A, and this Lab9 is the new database we just created. We can choose the database that we want to give access to. So I click this and click go, and I will give this user all the access, all the privilege to access this database, the admin's right. Now we already assign the privilege to user1 to access Lab9 database. So now we have already we have done with the database setup and also the user privileges. And I will show you the code. The first thing before you modify the add scores.php, right, you need to create a new file and save it as config.php. This file will be used to store the database connection code. So for us, in this lab exercise, I want you to use the PDO API, PHP data objects. For PDO data objects, as I have mentioned during the lecture session, PDO is the PHP data objects and it is database independent. If you use PDO, it means that you don't need to stick to use MySQL as your database. In future, you can modify it you can change the database from MySQL to other database. So this is the flexibility when we use PDO. And this is the config file, and if you refer to the sample codes, it is similar to the sample code that I have shared with you. Just explain to you. For when we want to write codes using write the config file using PDO, for the connections, normally for PDO, right, when we create a new object, we have to pass in the connection string, database username, and database password. For connection string, we need to follow the format. We have to indicate the name of the database. So now we are using MySQL, so we'll put MySQL here. And you have to indicate the host name, which is localhost. So you have to put host equals to, and this is the name. DB name, you have to indicate the DB name. So this is the DB name for is Lab09. So this is the format for the connection string. So username, we have defined user1, database password user1 ABC. So this is something that you can. This is to allow you for us to connect to the database. Now in the config file, there are I hope you still remember there are 5 main steps to access MySQL in PHP. First step is to connect to the database. We need to write code to connect database and also handle the connection errors. So these 2 steps will be handled by the config.php file. So to connect to the database, we need to define a new PDO object. And this new PDO object will be created by passing in, we need to pass in the connection string, database username, and database password. So we already define variables to store the information, and we pass in this string information. And this is a new PDO object. I have created it using the name PDO. And we also set attribute. So the set attribute will allow us to set an attribute, and this one we want to set the PDO error mode to exception. We want to catch if there is any exception, so that we will know what is the error. If connection successful, we will print this message. This is a test message, but in your project, in your assignment, after you have test and the database connected successfully, you can comment it. Because normally in the professional software, we won't have this kind of message printing at the user side. You can have it in the log file, but don't need to show it to the user. And this one is just for testing purpose and for the demonstration. We also have the step 2, handle connection error. If there is any PDO exceptions, we fail to connect to the database. This program will catch the error and print out the error message, database connection failed, together with the message, the error message. So this is the config file, which represent the step 1 and also step 2. Now we come to add_scores.php. Add_scores.php, this is the files that since we want to retrieve the list of students' IDs from the student table. So this file we will need to connect to database. So we have to use the include statement to include the config.php. So once we include here, we will be able to establish the connections to the database. And next, if you scroll down, this is the part related to how to generate the data list and retrieve the option value from database. If you have never used data list before, I have shared a reference link here. In the question, I have shared okay, so this is the HTML syntax for data list. So if you refer to this link, you will be able to see this is the basic. We have a layer. This is the HTML syntax to create a data list. So from the data list, so for example, this is a data list for browsers, we want to show a list of the users we want to input. We'll select the user want to select one of the one of the browsers. So this is the option values that already hardcoded. But for our exercise, we don't want to hardcode it. We want to retrieve the option value from the student table. The option value will be the student ID. So in order to do it, so you can see we have created an input list. The name of the input list is student ID. So it depends on what is the option value that we have selected, and we will pass this to the backend. So we have already created a key name student ID here. Now this data list, this is the data list. We need to have opening tag for data list and closing tags for data list. In order to retrieve the option value, we have to embed the PHP code. So this is the PHP code that will allow us to execute the SQL statement. So we have to add in this is the SQL statement. Select all from the students, order by student ID ascending order. So when you see here, when we in this code, you can see is in ascending order. Okay, so the result, once we will define a result variables to store the result when we execute the query. So when we for PDO, we will use the query functions to execute the SQL. So this is the this is what have been used in the object PDO object to when we use query. When we call this query method, we will be able to run SQL statement and return a PDO statement object stored here. And to retrieve the values in the result, we use a while loop. So, and we call the fetch. So these fetch functions will allow us to fetch each row of the result. We will be able to loop through these, and each of the record will store in this variable, the rest variable. And we want to print the value, which is the student ID. So this is, if you see here, this is actually the name of the attribute, student ID. So it must be exactly same as this one, the attribute name. So we want to print the student ID as the option value. So it will loop through. So now we have 6 records. So it will loop through the 6 times to print the 6 option values. So this we will be able to see the 6 records here. So this is the while loop. Okay. So from the select statement, we managed to retrieve the list of all the records from students, and from all the records we want to retrieve the student ID. You can also put select student ID. If you don't want to put select all, you can also use select. You can also put modify this to become select student ID from students. This you can also do that. Now this is the code to retrieve. So this is this is represent the step 3 and step 4. Execute the query and process the result to print it as a option value. So don't forget to close the connection and free the resources. We point it to now to free the resources. So this is for add scores. So after we add the scores, it will come to grader.php. For grader.php, we have to modify this to, you see in the add scores, we will come to grader.php to do the processing. And now there is a new value that has been passed in. In our previous lab, we already passed, your code already has score 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now you have another new input from data list. student ID. So you need to define a new variable, student ID, and you also have to add in the student ID. You can this new variable will store the data passed from the student ID. So this is in the previous lab we don't have this. So now we have to add in. And since we are using the post method, so we will refer to this. We will use the super global post array, and this is the name of the key, which is same as the name that I have used here. So I've stored this in the student ID variable. So you need to modify your code to add in this new variable. Next, we have to add in the code to include the config file to connect to the database and also handle the connection error. Next, I write a try and catch. So this in this sample code, I use the transaction way to write it. So if we want to use transactions, let's say this is to demonstrate to you how to use the transaction method. If let's say this is very useful if we have multiple queries, but in this lab we only have one query to execute. But in some cases, you may have multiple queries to be in one transaction. If you are using transactions, the good thing is one of the query field, we don't need to commit it. We can if there is any error in any of the query when we execute it, this program already cached the exception. We will exit and roll back the database into the previous version. So this will allow you to do it if you write the code using the transaction format. To start the transaction, you call the begin transaction. Your PDO objects have to call the begin transaction function. So we start the transaction, then you can write a SQL statement to insert. So the insert statement is similar to what you have learned in your database class. Insert into, specify the table, and this is the attribute table attribute name that you are going to insert value. So this must be exactly same as what the attribute name that you have defined in the database. Oh, yeah, okay. So this must be exactly same as all the attribute names that you have used in the database must be exactly the same. And these will be the values. So values, you pass in the variable that store this value. So this will be same as the one that we have defined here. So I pass in the variable and I also pass in the average value and the grade. Okay, so this SQL statement will help us to insert a new record. For the score ID will be auto increment. We call query to execute this SQL, to insert a new record. So if everything is successful, we will commit the database. We'll commit the transaction. And in this example, in order for us to continue to the next part, because we are going to provide two links for the user to choose whether they want to navigate to view scores or to add a new score. If they want to view scores, right, we want them to view the scores of the latest record. So in this example, I pass the last ID. We pass the last ID, last inserted ID to the next page, view scores.php. If they are going to add a new scores, we will allow them to navigate to add scores.php. For views to get the last inserted ID, we define a variable to store the last inserted ID, and we execute this function, last insert ID. So if you have a database that has an auto increment, this is to allow you to retrieve the last record. Normally, no matter when we have a new record, it will always be the last insert record. So we can use this to retrieve the last insert ID. And in this example, we have create a new variable called last ID to store this ID. And this when I just now when I demo to you, I just demonstrate that we want to prove that this we have retrieved the correct one. So if you see that I show you now we just show you again. The last inserted ID is equals to 1 because we just create a new database again. When I refresh this table, I can see the new record with the average score and also grade has been inserted as well. Okay, so this is if we come to view score, we want to view the score for this first record, for the record that we just inserted, the last inserted record. We can see that this is the ID that has been passed, and we will be able to echo the values by selecting the record from the database. Okay, so this is the part for grader.php. Now, if the user choose to go to view the scores, now I will open view scores to shows you the code. So first thing, this script also will require us to use database. So again, we have to include config file. So in order to connect to the database and also handle the connection error. And in view scores.php, we have seen in the one that I just showed you. This is a get method. When you see anything with question mark, right, it represents the get method. So in the grader.php, we have used a get method. So this is actually a way we can embed an ID and pass to the next page. We can use the get method. Get method is very useful in this case. So we use the get method, pass the last inserted ID to view scores page. So when we come to view score page, we have to use the super global array get in order to retrieve the ID value. So we can see this is the key that we have defined ID, and this is the variable which store the last insert ID that we have retrieved by calling the last insert ID function. So when we get the ID, I has actually created a new variable called score ID to store this value. Now we're already getting the ID from the previous page using the get method. For this, for view scores, we want to echo the score values in the form, in this edit score form. So we can see from here, actually this is a form with two buttons, update button and delete button. So in our form, we have to include these 6 input text, but instead of showing it as empty, we want to show the original value. So we have to use the value attribute and also embed the PHP code to print it. How to retrieve this value? We will use the score ID that passed from the grader.php to view scores.php. So this ID will allow us to select the record that we want to retrieve. Now we write a SQL statement and store it in SQL2. This is a select statement. We want to select all the attribute values from scores table where score ID equals to this last inserted ID. So this record with the last inserted ID record will be retrieved, and we execute this query and store the result in this variable result2. We use the fetch function. Since we know that there is only one record will be retrieved, so I have defined these 7 variables to score each of these. So we use this. We store the results in this. When we fetch a row, we store the values in this array. and we use the key. So this key will be exactly same as the key of the database. So I store this, I define variable to store each of the value. And next, I echo the value here. These variables will be used to do the echo. So these values will be able to display here. So this is one of the way that we want to show the original value. We have to retrieve it from the table and show and echo the value here. So this is one way. So in this, when we design the form, you can see that this form will send when the user click, either the user have two buttons to choose, can choose to click update or delete. So you can see in this form, right, I have two input type. And I also give name. So remember when we design, when we do the form processing, you need to add the key name. So you have to use the name attribute and define your own key name. So this is the one that we already, these are the name for the 6 scores. We also have for the button, the submit button, I also define two names. For update button, I create a key name called update. And for delete button, I also have a key name called delete. So that later we come to the edit scores, right, we can recognize whether we receive an update, whether the user click update or the user click delete. So the update code will refer to here. The delete code will refer to the delete statements here. So these are the two buttons which we must define our own key name so that we can do we can recognize what user actions has been performed. For on click, and this is the on click statements, the DOM JavaScript which will give us a confirmation message to ask the user whether the user want to delete the record or not. The on click events. So this is an event handling for to make sure that the user didn't accidentally click the delete button. Besides the input from the user, that will allow the user to enter to update the records. It is a text input. We also keep two hidden input here. When the type equals to hidden, that means the values, any input will be invisible from user. So user won't be able to see this. So I want to pass the score ID, and also I have defined two key names. One is score ID, another one is the student ID. So I want to pass in these two values to the backend, and this I embed the PHP code here so that I can carry the score ID. And the student ID we have retrieved from the database. So I also want to pass the embed the PHP code, and this value we use echo to print the value here. So student ID and score ID will be submit together with this 6 score to the backend if we use the to the edit scores to do the further processing. Okay, so this is the code for the view scores. For view scores, the important thing is you have to write the select statement to retrieve the original values for this particular record from the database. So when the user make any changes, so let's say now this score 4 is changed to 4, may click update. The score has updated successfully for this student. And when I refresh the database, we can see the changes. Score 4 has changed to ID. So now we go to edit scores. We can go to edit scores. But this will be this form will be handled by edit scores, and the data will be submitted to the backend using the post method. Now we come here. So again, this file also will use database, so we include config file again. And since when we do, if we are doing update, right, again, we will need to check the grade because some of the marks changes, the average marks will change, and also the grade also may change. So in order to make sure that it is something that in order to make sure that this is the we can get the latest grade again, you have to use the function. You have to call the function again. So if you want to make the codes, we can see that actually we have used these functions in more than one file. So you can actually take out all the commonly used functions that will be used by multiple PHP programs into a separate file, and we can include the files the file that consists of the commonly used functions, so that you don't need to copy and paste the functions again and again. So if it is going to be used in multiple PHP files, you can actually have one file to include all the functions that will be used in multiple files. But in this example, I just straight away copy and paste the function here, so that we can call this function to check the grade again if when we for the average, for the new average scores after we update do the updates. Okay, so now it depends on whether we receive update or delete. So if the user click update, so this is the part of the code that will be executed. Okay, so if you see when we receive updates, right, we want to get the score ID again using the post method, or the super global arrays will be used to retrieve score ID, student ID, and the 6 scores. Because we need to update the we want to update the scores again. So we need to recalculate. This is actually same as what you have done in the grader.php. We have call the scores. We have store the scores for scores again, calculate the average, and also check the grade. And now all these new values we will update into this. We will update the record. So for and this is we have to add in the code to execute the SQL query. So again, we also use the try catch. In the try part, we begin the transaction. You write a SQL statement for update. So this update statement, we have to specify which table you want to update and set the first one will be the table attribute name. So the second one is our variable. So make sure that you put the right name. You can see this is the variable name that we define in this program, and this must be exactly same as the attribute name in the table. So the first one will be the attribute name from the table. Second one is the value, equals to what value. So since the value is dynamic, so we already define variables to store the value sent by the post method. This is a super global array that store all the values sent from the view scores. Again, we call the and one thing we want to update. We have to indicate which record we want to update. So we need to pass in the score ID as well. We have to indicate the condition here where score ID. This is the attribute name from the table, and this is the variable, which is the score ID that passed from the view scores. So this is the record that we are going to update. Execute the query, commit it, and print a message to inform users that the record updated successfully. And this is the student ID, just to prove to them this particular record has been updated. If there is any error in the executions, the database will be rolled back, and we just can print a message to inform the user. Lastly, don't forget to free the resources and close it. Okay, for PDO, point to equals, when you put equals to now, you will free the resources. If let's say user click delete, this will receive the delete. If this exit is set post delete, is set is for us to check whether the variable exists or not. If they click delete button, this will be sent to the backend. Again, we want the score ID because we want to delete the record, so I don't need to put other, this is not important for us anymore because we want to delete the entire record. So we only need the score ID. And begin the transaction. The SQL statement, you have to write a delete statement. Delete from this is a table name scores, where you have to specify which score ID that you are going to remove. Execute the query, commit it, and print a message to inform user record deleted successfully. If there is any error, catch the exceptions, roll back the transaction, inform the user, delete record failed. Lastly, don't forget to free the resources. So basically, this is it is a very simple program to demonstrate to you how we can handle the update and delete in the same script. We have the we write the if else statement to check whether we receive an update or delete. So this will help us to check whether the update is the update button is the one that had been clicked or the delete button is the one that clicked. We use the if else statement to separate the coding for update. And this will be the part. If we receive a delete, we will execute this part of code. Okay. So this in this page also we will give them a navigation link to navigate to add new stores page again. So this is the simple demonstration to show you how to add in the database part for add_scores.php. So just repeat again, you need to first define a config file to include the code to connect to the database. Step 1. Step 2, handle the connection error. So this is a standard code. You just need to, we can refer to the the sample codes. Just need to change the database name for it. If since we are using MySQL, but the database username and password also you have to change. Yeah, it might be different from the most probably you are using different users, so we have to change this as well. But the format of the connection string will be the same. So this is all the other parts will be same as the sample code. So for add scores, we have execute a SQL statement, the select statement in order to populate the option value for this data list. And this is to define the sample for the to know more about the data list. You can look at the W3 schools link. Okay, so this you must define this input list. Okay, and you can see list equals to students, and we will refer to this list and get when the user select the any things from this list, we will recognize this as an input. And we have defined a new key name student ID here. Okay, so for grader.php, we're also adding in the PHP part to insert the new record. So, and when we come to view scores.php, this is the one that we have passed in as a score ID to help us to retrieve the record in order to print the values from the database. So in edit scores.php, if we click updates, we receive all the scores value, and also there are two hidden input here, score ID and student ID. So we will be able to do the further processing here by executing the update part, or if they click delete button, then we will execute the delete queries. So this is one of the way for you to handle the edit, update, and delete. If you have anything not clear, you want to ask me some questions, you can send me email or you can send me message through the Teams.